welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, very, very much appreciated. I think I've caught up with all the comments, but if I've missed one or two or haven't caught up with those as yet, I will do obviously as soon as I'm able to do so. Right, okay, so this week again, another independent episode of the show, and this week's independent bottling company is Hannah Whisky Merchants, who you probably know from their single cask releases in their Lady of the Glen range. And this week I'm having a look at a new range that they've created called Dalgety. I believe Dalgety is the village or town where Hannah Whisky Merchants are located. I should have made a note of it, but obviously I didn't, but I think that's the reason behind the name. So the range is obviously differs from their single cask range in that it's a small batch range. They don't go into any detail about how many casks of each have been bottled, and you know, it's not unusual for an independent bottling company to do a sort of a small batch kind of range. More often than not, they tend to bottle them at sort of 46% or thereabouts, to make them, shall we say, a little bit more affordable. Not that I'm saying that these are particularly expensive, but what Hannah Whisky decided to do is bottle these at cask strength. They all sort of retail in and around the sort of, I would guess, 60 to sort of mid 60s, obviously depending upon who's retailing them. Of course, if it's you know who and they're incredibly small markups, they're going to be cheaper than everybody else. The other two bottlings that I'm looking at today are their other vatted malt that they started releasing early in the year, I believe, called St. Bridgets Kirk. Now, I think I did review the first batch. They're obviously on to batch 3 now, and I have a sample of batch number 2, so I thought it might be fun to just kind of like compare the two, see how they differ. So so that's basically what I'm going to do. So really not a great deal else to say apart from let's have a look at today's item. Okay, so we're going to kick off with an 11-year-old Tormore, very in vogue at the moment, as you may recall, recently purchased by Elixir Distillers, and I think I did an episode of the show not so long ago on them. So this is an 11-year-old Tormore, it's a small batch, refilled sherry hoggies, distilled in January of 2011, bottled in July of this year at 50.5%. Like I said, I don't know how many refill hoggies because I don't know the exact number of bottles, although I think on the label it probably says, but I obviously only have the sample bottles, and no, it doesn't say anything at all about number of bottles on there. So anyway, we shall see what it comes out like. Bottling number 2 is a 13-year-old Tamnavulin, bottled at 51.9%, bourbon barrel and virgin oak finish barrel. So seems to imply 2 casks, and distilled sometime in 2009 and obviously bottled this year. Don't know the exact dates of those. Bottling number 3 is a small batch Craigellachie. It's a 12-year-old bottled at 49.9%, and this is 2 refill Oloroso sherry hoggies. It was distilled in 2009 obviously and bottled sometime this year. All of these samples came to me last month, so they would have been bottled, you know, I would guess between sort of July and August of this year. Bottling number 4 is called An Islay. It is 2 refill Oloroso sherry hoggies, so cool. Talk about sort of like overkill on the finishing and sherry. After last week's sherry marathon, I'm at it again. Good God. Anyway, so this is bottled at 51.8%, distilled in October of 2009, bottled in July of this year. Then we're going to move on to the two St Bridgets Kirk bottlings. So this is batch number 2, bottled at 45%, and it was a vatting of 20-year-old Speyside, Highland and Islay malts. Now I'm guessing that it's the same as, almost the same as batch number 3, which is the, according to the information I was given, certainly batch number 3, the 20-year-old components were all sort of vatted into cask at a relatively young age. The only difference between the two is that batch number 3 had a cask of 10-year-old Williamson, which had been aged in an Oloroso hoggy, vatted into it. Obviously Williamson is teaspoon Lefroy, for those of you that don't know that, and it's a slightly higher ABV at 48.5%, so I'm guessing that the 10-year-old Williamson is basically what's pushed the ABV up above 45%. So I think that's going to be interesting, yeah, that's today's lineup, so not a great deal else to say apart from let's kick off with a bit of Tormore then. Right, okay, so considering that's refill sherry, very refill sherry I think, judging by the colour, so let's see what the nose gives us. Yep, it's very fresh, it's very barleyed, it's citric, it's kind of pretty much classic Tormore kind of nose, you know, fresh, somewhat simple, but, you know, delivers some lovely barley. It's quite fragrant. There's a little bit of dried fruit, a little bit of sherry dried fruit in the background, some vanilla, green apple, a little bit of edginess, a little edgy barley note. I mean, that's a really quite pleasant nose in actual fact. I mean, as we found out when I did the Tormore tasting episode of the show, it can have some lovely character, and you know, it's like I said, it's not the most complex of whiskies, but the sherry has just added a soupçon of dried fruit, so it's, yeah, all really nicely harmonious and nicely balanced, I think. See what the palate like. It's a touch weightier on the palate, a little oilier, fuller, touch more sherry character, obviously dried fruit. A little bit of fudge coming through on the mid palate, a bit of barley, touch of citrus, good length, slightly earthy aftertaste. Not the most complex of whiskies, but then, as we well know, Tormore isn't exactly well renowned for its complexity, but it's got a nice progression. It's nicely balanced. Like I said, the palate shows a little bit more sherry character, but it's harmonious. It's a lovely whiskey, I think, and a good starter. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 13-year-old Tamnavulin. So bourbon barrel and virgin oak finished bourbon barrel. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Oak. As to be expected, grippy, nippy oak, a little bit of an alcohol prickle, a little bit of green fruit, green apple, again some citrus, marzipan, touch of spice. It's got that almost kind of like French oaky, kind of gingery sort of spicy kind of note. I'm not really getting a lot of spirit character, has to be said. I mean, there's always that sort of question of why do you sort of use a, you know, virgin oak finishing to you know, an American oak cask, and the obvious answer is because, well, it may well have not had be imparting an awful lot of oak character to start off with. I mean, it's not a bad nose. It's a little bit over into the dark side, and yeah, you kind of get the feeling of some spirit character, but it's really not giving an awful lot, it has to be said. So pass on. Very oaky, very rich, very spicy, very gingery again. You can certainly taste those new oak tannins right on the finish. It comes through that real sort of charred, toasted character. Again, really gingery, and it does have a sort of French oaky kind of feel to it. Little bitter on the finish, maybe some white chocolate possibly. No real spirit character on the palate whatsoever. I mean, it is just all about the oak and all about the virgin oak really at the end of the day, which has made it a little unbalanced, I think, on the palate. Well, quite a lot unbalanced to be fair. I mean, it's pleasant. I mean, if you like the sort of like gingery, sort of oaky kind of character in your whiskey, then it's certainly up your street. But for me, it's just too much oak and just not enough enough spirit. So yeah, that's that one. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Craigellachie. Refill Oloroso Sherry Hoggies. Let's see what the nose goes on this one, shall we? A lot more active sherry. Quite soft. Walnuts, raisinated fruits, prune, a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of spice. Not really getting a lot of Craigellachie character, which in some respects is probably not maybe such a bad thing, as it can be really quite variable and it can be quite rough, to be honest with you. So yeah, again we have a sort of like yet another whiskey that's heavily dominated by the casks that it's been aged in, and again, you know, some of you are going to kind of love this stuff. For me, it's yeah, it is yet another sherried whiskey, I suppose. Completely clean, no off notes. Getting a little bit of manure now, which is well, adding a a nuance, shall we say. Anyway, let's see what the palate's like. Soft, juicy, again, raisinated cherry fruit, dark chocolate, milk chocolate, a little bit of biscuitiness, some maltiness, a little bit of tannin, a little bit of bitter tannin on the finish. I think the palate's got a lot more complexity. Again, we're all in the sort of like the oak territory. There's no Craigellachie character. Again, like I said, you know, maybe it's not such a bad thing. Nice spiciness on the aftertaste. I can feel it tingling still. A little bit of clove as well. I prefer the palate. I think the palate's got a little bit more going on for it than the nose. But yet again, it's kind of like very heavily sherry dominated. So if that's your kind of cup of tea, then or your single malt whiskey, I should say, then you're going to love it. For me, yeah, as you well know, it's not the sort of thing that floats my boat. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Anne Islay. Again, refill Oloroso Sherry Hoggy. So let's see what the nose gives on this end, shall we? Quite medicinal. Salt, citrus, pine needles, tar, earthy peat, medicinal peat. Probably looking at Lefroy again, I would have thought. Touch of black pepper, some subtle sherried notes. I mean, as we know, sort of peat and sherry, they're good bedfellows. They're enjoyable, and this is a lovely nose. It works. It's really nice. A little bit of bog myrtle. Yeah, like I said, I mean, I'm guessing that it's possibly Lefroy. It certainly feels that kind of way. I mean, it could well be Kalila, or it could be wrong, but that sort of medicinal kind of note does kind of lead me down the sort of Lefroy path. And at 60 something odd quid, yeah, I quite like this. Let's see what the palate's like. a lovely finish, really chewy, dense, malty, tarry, peaty, more sherry that kicks off on the palate, more sort of like pruny, raisinated, dried fruit, earth, peat smoke, again, medicinal notes on the finish, very long, really quite an impressive couple of casks. That's matured really nicely. Again, ABV is just kind of like just tingling those spices. Don't think it needs any water. I mean, 51.8%. Don't think it needs that. I obviously don't have enough there to stick any water with. But oh, that's got a lovely finish. That really is long, really intense, and like I said, showing a little bit more sherry character on the palate. But you know, that's a good whiskey. I mean, I love that for the finish on its own. I mean, yeah, really, very, very impressive. Okay, so moving on to the batch 2 of the St Bridgets Kirk. Now, you might be able to find this on auction sites or what have you, but I don't think this is. I think this is pretty much all gone now. But anyway, let's see what the nose gives us. Dark, woody, little bit of peat, some herbally sort of Speyside notes. So I've got that slight sort of Armagnac-y kind of dried fruit character going on. Walnut, prune, tobacco smoke, bog myrtle, raisins. That's a really complex nose. Great value, I think. I mean, I don't think this was particularly expensive from memory. Again, around about the sort of mid-60s. Which, for a 20-year-old whiskey, I mean, you know, forget the fact that it's a vatted whiskey. That, to me, that's neither here nor there. You know, it's to me, it's all about, you know, is this really good value for money? And that's a lovely nose. So it'll pass right now. Dark, woody, quite tannic, treacle, walnut, prune, bog myrtle, little bit of peat, gentle peat, dark chocolate, raisinated fruits. That's got some depth. Nice maturity as well. It doesn't quite have that sort of dusty old kind of feel to it. It's got a nice kind of freshness, and yeah, a lovely vibrancy to it. Good length, sort of continuing, sort of like with the dark dried fruits and the sort of the dark chocolate. A little bit of ash, some citrus. Stunningly good. That's all I can say. I mean, if you managed to get hold of a bottle of that, then you know that was a gorgeous whiskey. And like I said, you know, I don't really care if it was a vatted whiskey at all. It's very much in vogue now, isn't it? You know, and I mean, I suppose that you get sort of distillery sort of head blender, master blender comes along and says, right, well, I want to do X, Y, and Z, sets these things in motion. Of course, then leaves to go to another distillery or another job, and these casks are sort of like are no longer desired because in comes a new head distiller or a master blender, different ideas, wants to do different things, and these kind of casks are either kind of like left and forgotten about, or they're just kind of jobbed off. And you know, 10 years ago, nobody wanted them. You know, they were sort of like, well, why do I want sort of like some casks of pre-blended stuff? You know, and then you know, I mean, I'm not going to say that sort of Ian at North Star Spirits kind of was the first person to ever bottle these things, but he did push them and promote them. You know, he kind of like thought, well, yeah, I'm picking up these pretty old, these parcels of old blended stock, you know, an absolute song, and suddenly, you know, saying, you know, people are going, wow, these are really good, and this was really good, and it's great. You know, this is sort of giving new life to stuff that sort of, I guess, would have just ended up in some ubiquitous blend somewhere at the end of the day. So, good stuff. Right, okay, so let's move on to batch 3 of the St Bridgets Kirk. So essentially the same as batch 2, but with a cask of Oloroso matured 10-year-old Williamson added to the blend. So let's see what nose gives us on this end, shall we? Well, that peat is obviously noticeable from the word go. So definitely getting that kind of slightly medicinal, fresh, herbal peatiness. But again, beneath that you can get that sort of like mature, sort of like pruny walnut, hazelnut, sort of rich sherry fruits, a little bit more dustiness. It does seem to sort of show some more aged character, certainly a little bit more than batch number 2. I think that's a gorgeous nose. It's absolutely sensational. Really deep, lovely maturity, touch of freshness to it. That vatting in of the Williamson has certainly sort of just given it a little bit of vibrancy, a little bit more peatiness. Yeah, I like that. That's really, really impressive. Let's see what it passes like. That's a gorgeous mouthful, really complex. Feels like it's showing more maturity than batch number 2. Dusty raisinated fruit, touch of vanilla, dark chocolate, prunes, earthy peat, little bit of medicinal peat, walnut, coffee. Gorgeous length, really, really long. A little bit of salt, citrus in the finish. Bit of chewy malt as well. I mean, that is just gorgeous. And like I said, this is mid-60s for essentially, I mean, although it's technically it's a 10-year-old malt, of course, you know, the reality is it's a lot older than that, and it really shows that. And that's stunning. That really is really very, very good. And certainly ticks all my boxes, so very impressive. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Well, firstly, a big thank you to Paul at Hannah Whisky for the samples for today's episode of the show. Very, very much appreciated, and I hope you're not disappointed with one's review. Certainly, I think the Tormore was a pleasant whisky. Again, it's Tormore. Don't expect a huge amount of complexity. But it was really nicely balanced. It was just a nice whisky at the end of the day, you know. A little bit more sherry on the palate than on the nose, but again, it still wasn't, you know, unbalanced. It was all quite harmonious, and you know, that was a good bottling of Tormore at the end of the day. It had, you know, a reasonable amount of character. Like I said, not a huge amount of complexity, but character nevertheless, which is, you know, all, at the end of the day, all you can ask for. So I think that was really quite enjoyable. Tamnavulin, yeah, just a bit too much oak for me. Again, you know, the quality was pretty good. Couldn't really get an awful lot of Tamnavulin character, but then I suppose you ask the question, well, what character does Tamnavulin have? It's not one of those that sort of readily springs to mind. Again, it can be quite variable in its characteristics, but in this instance, the virgin oak was just taken over the whole thing too much, and you know, if you like that, then great. But for me, like I said, too much virgin oak. The Craigellachie, again, a little bit too much oak character, a little bit too much sherry, not enough distillery, well, no real distillery character, but like I said, you know, with Craigellachie is sort of like a huge issue. But at the end of the day, it falls into the same kind of trap that the Tamnavulin falls into, in that it's all about the cask, and the balance is just sort of like skewed in that favour. The Anne Islay, like, you know, okay, so yes, you could argue that it's peat and sherry, But peat and sherry, good bedfellows, like I said, and it did have plenty of character. And like I said, to me, I thought it was Lefroy, or possibly Williamson, or maybe something of that kind of ilk. I mean, it might be Culila, but like I said, it may be a bit too medicinal for Culila, but it's, like I said, could be wrong. No doubt Paul will probably tell me what it is exactly, which I'm probably not allowed to tell you, but if he does, then that would be cool. But you know, putting all that aside, again, just a really lovely whiskey. And the same could be said for batch 2 of the St. Bridgets Kirk. You know, it's just really complex, and you know, it's just sort of like the kind of stuff that, you know, is really good value. Forget the fact that it's a vatted malt. That to me, you know, you just have to sort of say we're beyond the sort of like, you know, single malt are the greatest things in sliced bread. We're well beyond that. You know, nobody believes all that rubbish anymore. It's all about the quality of the juice, and you know, the quality of the blending and all that kind of stuff. And that just had it in buckets as far as I'm concerned, and possibly topped by batch number 3 of the St. Bridgets Kirk. I mean, you know, yes, a little bit more heavy on the peat. I mean, hence the, you know, you would expect that from having a cask of 10-year-old Williamson vatted into it. But again, it just had that sort of like gorgeous maturity underneath the peat. And it's sort of like, you know, if you were buying a 20-year-old sort of single malt, you know, then you're looking at considerably more money than this. And this is delivering so much bang for your buck, it's untrue. So, you know, if you like, you know, mature whiskies with a sort of like a youthful edge and a bit of peat and all that kind of stuff, then you know, look for it. I mean, it's really worth the money, I can tell you. So yeah, good one to finish on as far as I'm concerned. So anyway, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. Not too much waffle, although a lot of you do seem to enjoy the waffle. Yeah, I think some great whiskies. And like I said, you know, go find them at the end of the day. So all that's left to say is, as per usual, good dramming, good afternoon. Сейчас,